Chen had spent most of his life studying organisms that lived under microscopes, buried in ocean vents, or floating inside petri dishes. None of those experiences had prepared him for the moment he stepped out of a silver diplomatic shuttle and onto a balcony that hovered thousands of meters above a glowing alien ocean. The air smelled faintly of metal and something sweet, like unfamiliar flowers. A wide bridge of transparent crystal extended from the landing platform toward the palace ahead. Towers rose from the structure like frozen lightning, bending sunlight into shifting colors that washed across the sky. Chen paused for a moment and muttered quietly to himself. Okay. Note to self. Next time someone says routine assignment, ask more questions. Two tall figures waited for him at the end of the bridge. They looked almost human at first glance, which somehow made the situation even stranger. Their skin carried a soft, pale tone, and their eyes were calm and observant. But their ears were long and elegant, extending gracefully behind their heads like curved leaves. The movement of those ears seemed subtle, expressive, almost like an extra language. The taller of the two stepped forward. Xenobiologist Chen of Earth, the alien said, her voice smooth and melodic. Welcome to the royal court of Ashira. Chen blinked. You know, hearing my job title in an alien palace is still slightly surreal. The second figure tilted his head curiously. Is that undesirable? No, no, Chen said quickly, raising his hands. It's just that the last place I worked was a damp laboratory next to a vending machine that kept stealing my coins. This is a bit of an upgrade. The aliens exchanged a brief glance that Chen suspected might have been amusement. They escorted him across the crystal bridge. Beneath the transparent surface, the ocean glowed in slow waves of violet light. Massive shapes moved far below the water, silhouettes of creatures large enough to swallow a human research submarine without noticing. Chen glanced down and cleared his throat. Just curious, he said carefully. Those giant glowing things in the ocean? They're friendly, right? The guide answered calmly. They rarely attack structures. Rarely, Chen repeated. That is an extremely comforting word. The palace interior was even more overwhelming. Walls formed from living crystal curved upward into impossible arches, and thin streams of floating light drifted through the air like quiet constellations. Technology was everywhere, but nothing looked mechanical. Everything hummed softly, alive and elegant. At the center of the grand hall stood a throne grown from translucent stone. Seated upon it was Queen Ashira. Chen had reviewed images of the Ashirian ruler during his briefing, but none of them had prepared him for seeing her in person. She looked almost completely human. Her posture was calm, confident, and effortless. The only clear difference was the pair of long, graceful ears extending from her head, their edges catching the palace light. Her eyes studied Chen with quiet curiosity. Chen suddenly became aware that he had been staring. Right, he said quickly. Apologies. I promise that's the last time I'll stare like someone who just discovered aliens exist. Ashira's lips curved slightly. You traveled across interstellar space to reach this palace, she said. Your reaction is understandable. Chen nodded slowly. Thank you for acknowledging that. My university colleagues insisted I act professionally, but none of them mentioned that the job would involve walking into a floating rainbow castle. A faint ripple of soft laughter moved through the court. Ashira leaned slightly forward. You were invited for a specific purpose, Dr. Chen. Chen straightened. Yes, Your Majesty. The genetic survey. He gestured toward the case he carried. Inside were compact scanners and sequencing tools designed to analyze biological material from unknown species. The Ashirian Empire had requested an independent xenobiologist to verify certain aspects of the royal bloodline's genetic stability. At least that was the official explanation. Chen stepped closer, placing the case carefully on a floating diagnostic platform that extended from the floor. To be honest, he said, adjusting the scanner, this might be the most unusual laboratory I've ever worked in. One of the royal attendants spoke quietly. You have worked in many laboratories? Chen nodded. Oh yes. Underground labs, orbiting labs. One laboratory that accidentally flooded because someone thought the emergency shower was a coat hanger. Several alien courtiers blinked. Ashira tilted her head slightly. That seems inefficient. It was extremely inefficient, Chen agreed. He activated the scanner. Soft rings of blue light expanded across the platform. All right, he said. Routine procedure. Just a small genetic sample, a quick scan, and we confirm everything looks healthy. Simple science. Nothing mysterious, nothing dramatic. The elderly royal physician stepped forward to assist. Chen glanced at him. You look like someone who already knows this will not remain simple. The doctor said nothing, but his long ears shifted slightly, and somewhere in the silent machinery of the palace laboratory, the scanners began analyzing the first strands of royal DNA, quietly preparing to reveal something that would change the fate of two civilizations. The laboratory inside the palace did not resemble any medical facility Chen had ever seen. Instead of metal tables and humming refrigerators, the room was built from curved layers of pale crystal that seemed to grow directly from the floor. Thin threads of blue light floated through the air, like slow-moving fireflies, linking instruments that hovered quietly above circular platforms. Chen stood in the center of the room, with his portable scanner open in front of him, staring at the alien equipment surrounding it. I feel like my laptop just walked into a room full of extremely sophisticated philosophers, he muttered. The elderly Ashirian physician beside him raised one long eyebrow. His ears tilted slightly backward, a gesture Chen had already learned meant curiosity. You appear uncomfortable with our instruments. Oh, not uncomfortable, Chen said quickly. Just slightly intimidated. My equipment usually works next to a microwave and a coffee machine. Coffee? A hot drink that keeps scientists alive during bad experiments. The physician considered this seriously. We have something similar, he said, but it is fermented and mildly explosive. Chen blinked. I am both fascinated and slightly concerned. The physician gestured toward the scanner. Shall we begin? Chen nodded and placed the first genetic sample inside the chamber. The material had been collected from Queen Ashira only minutes earlier, an extremely small sample of cellular tissue, enough for a complete genomic scan. The scanner activated with a quiet pulse of light. Holographic strands of DNA slowly unfolded above the device, forming a rotating double helix of shimmering blue symbols. Chen leaned closer, studying the structure with professional focus. Beautiful, he murmured. Ashirian DNA was remarkably elegant. The coding patterns were complex but efficient, with structural redundancies that suggested centuries of evolutionary stability, or perhaps careful design. The physician watched silently. You find our genetics pleasing? Pleasing? Chen laughed softly. This is the dream of every xenobiologist. Perfectly readable alien DNA. Usually we get slime molds that dissolve the scanner. The physician did not laugh, but his ears moved again. Your species encounters many slime molds? You would not believe how many planets produce slime molds. The scan continued. Data streamed across the holographic display as the machine compared the sample against the universal biological reference library stored in Chen's system. Everything looked normal. Perfectly stable Ashirian genetic structure. No unusual mutations. No disease markers. Chen relaxed slightly. See, he said. Routine survey. Nothing strange. The physician nodded slowly. For completeness, Dr. Chen, the court has requested a secondary comparison. With what? With you. Chen blinked. With me? Yes. The physician gestured toward a second scanner chamber. Chen scratched his head. That seems unnecessary. It is a procedural curiosity. Chen shrugged. Well, curiosity is basically the foundation of science. He placed his hand into the scanner ring. A thin beam of light swept across his skin, collecting thousands of cellular samples in seconds. The machine hummed softly as it began mapping his DNA alongside the Queen sequence. Chen leaned back in his chair. While we wait, he said, can I ask something? You may. Why did the royal court request an independent human xenobiologist? You clearly have very advanced technology. The physician was quiet for a moment. Because humans are unexpected. That might be the nicest thing anyone has said about us. Your species evolves unpredictably. That makes your perspective valuable. Chen smiled slightly. Also makes us very difficult dinner guests. The physician tilted his head. Dinner guests? Never mind. The scanner chimed softly. Chen turned back to the holographic display. Two genetic spirals now rotated side by side above the platform. One Ashirian, one human. The comparison algorithm began aligning the sequences automatically. Chen expected the result to be exactly what science predicted. Minimal compatibility, distant evolutionary parallels, and nothing more. Instead, the display flickered. The physician leaned closer. Numbers appeared across the screen. Alignment percentages began to climb. 10%, 20, 30. Chen frowned. That's strange. The algorithm continued running. 40%, 50. Chen straightened in his chair. Okay, that's impossible. The physician said nothing. The numbers kept rising. 60, 70, 80. Chen stood up. No, 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 no. That's not how biology works. The comparison locked into its final alignment. 98%. The laboratory fell completely silent. Chen stared at the floating strands of DNA. The human sequence and the Queen's genetic code were nearly identical in several critical sections, far more similar than two completely separate species should ever be. Behind them, the door opened quietly. Queen Ashira had entered the laboratory. The physician slowly turned toward her. His long ears lowered slightly as he stepped closer and whispered, Your Majesty, this human's DNA matches yours. Ashira looked at the display, then at Chen. Chen raised one hand slowly. I would just like to say, he said carefully, that if this means I accidentally applied for membership in the royal family, that was definitely not part of the research proposal. For several long seconds, no one in the laboratory moved. The holographic DNA strands continued rotating slowly above the scanner, glowing quietly in the dim crystalline chamber. The numbers beside them did not change. 98% compatibility. Not statistical noise, not a scanning error. A biological relationship. Chen rubbed his face slowly. I would like to officially request, he said carefully, that someone tell me this machine is broken. The elderly physician did not respond immediately. Instead, he leaned closer to the floating display and adjusted the scanner controls. The hologram split into multiple layers as the machine began reanalyzing the sequence. Running the comparison again, the doctor murmured. Chen nodded quickly. Yes, excellent idea. Machines make mistakes all the time. One time my lab freezer locked itself and declared independence. The physician glanced at him. That is unusual behavior for a freezer. You'd be surprised. Behind them, Queen Ashira stepped closer to the platform. The light from the hologram reflected across her face and the long curve of her ears. She studied the data with an expression that was calm on the surface, but clearly focused beneath it. Explain the result, she said quietly. The physician finished the secondary scan. The numbers appeared again. 98%. Chen sighed. Well, he said, there goes the broken machine theory. The physician slowly straightened. This level of genetic alignment is impossible between unrelated species. Chen folded his arms. Correct. Humans share less DNA with some Earth animals than that. And those animals actually live on the same planet. Ashira looked at Chen. You are certain this data is accurate? Chen tapped the scanner lightly. This device has analyzed alien bacteria that eat radiation for breakfast. If it says two genomes match, they match. The physician's ears twitched uneasily. There are only two theoretical explanations. Chen raised a finger. Before we hear them, I would like to clarify that neither explanation should involve me secretly being an alien prince. My parents would be very confused. Ashira almost smiled. The physician ignored the joke. The first explanation, he said, is that the Ashirian species and humanity share a common evolutionary origin. Chen shook his head. No, that would require both species to evolve on the same planet or be artificially separated in the past. Correct. The physician paused. The second explanation is that one species created the other. Chen blinked slowly. Well, he said, that escalated quickly. Silence returned to the room. Ashira stepped closer to the holographic strands. Her eyes followed the lines of code drifting through the air. If the Ashirian Empire had created humanity, she said softly, there would be records. Chen nodded. Empires are terrible at keeping secrets. Someone always writes it down. The physician looked uneasy. Unless those records were intentionally removed. Chen leaned against the platform. That sounds suspiciously like a conspiracy. The physician did not laugh. Ashira turned toward Chen. Dr. Chen, how old is your species? Modern humans? Chen shrugged. 200,000 years roughly. Civilization? Maybe 10,000. Good coffee? About 400. Ashira tilted her head. Coffee appears important to your culture. You have no idea. The physician gestured toward the scanner again. These matching genetic sequences are not random. They appear in regulatory structures connected to neural development and immune adaptation. Chen leaned closer. So the overlap isn't just superficial. No, Chen whistled softly. That's very strange. He stared at the DNA display again. The patterns were undeniable. Entire segments of Ashirian biology mirrored human genetic structures. Not identical species, but not strangers either. Ashira spoke quietly. If our civilizations share biological ancestry, revealing this knowledge could destabilize the empire. Chen nodded. People get weird about family trees. Political factions could interpret the discovery in many ways. Such as? Ashira's voice remained calm. Some may claim humanity is a lost Ashirian colony. Chen groaned. Oh, please, no. Others may argue humans are an uncontrolled experiment. That's worse. And some, she continued, may decide the evidence should disappear. Chen looked up slowly. That option sounds extremely unhealthy for the human involved. The physician folded his hands. Until we understand the origin of this genetic connection, the information must remain restricted. Chen pointed at the scanner. That machine just announced I'm biologically related to an alien queen. I think the universe already knows something strange is happening. Ashira studied him carefully. You do not appear frightened. Chen shrugged. I study alien biology for a living. If I panicked every time something impossible happened, I'd never get any work done. He paused, then added thoughtfully, although I will admit this is a new category of impossible. Ashira looked back at the DNA hologram. The floating strands continued turning slowly, as if patiently waiting for someone to understand them. Chen tapped the edge of the scanner again. So, he said, either your species created humanity, or humanity is somehow connected to your royal bloodline. He rubbed his chin. I have to say, both explanations are extremely inconvenient for my vacation plans. Ashira glanced at him. You planned a vacation? Yes, a quiet one. Somewhere with beaches, preferably without interstellar political crises. For the first time since the scan began, Ashira laughed softly. The sound echoed gently through the crystal laboratory. But the numbers on the holographic display did not change. 98%. The palace corridors were quieter than Chen expected. After the revelation in the laboratory, he had imagined alarms, shouting officials, and dramatic security escorts. Instead, the Ashirian guards simply walked beside him with calm, silent precision. Their armor looked less like metal and more like layered crystal plates that shifted color with each step. Chen walked between them with his hands in his pockets. You know, he said, glancing at the guards, in human movies, this is usually the part where I'm thrown into a mysterious prison cell. Neither guard reacted, or at least a very uncomfortable interrogation room. Still nothing. Chen sighed. Tough crowd. Ahead of them, tall doors slid open without a sound. The guards stepped aside as Chen entered a circular chamber lined with glowing rings of light embedded in the walls. In the center stood a long table made of the same living crystal that seemed to grow throughout the palace. Queen Ashira was already there. She stood near a wide window overlooking the violet ocean below. Massive, luminous creatures moved slowly beneath the surface, their glowing shapes drifting like slow comets through the water. Chen paused beside the doorway. I have to say, he said, this palace has the best waiting room view I've ever seen. Ashira turned slightly toward him. The soft light from the window outlined the elegant shape of her long ears. You appear surprisingly calm for someone whose genetic identity has just become complicated. Chen shrugged. I once spent 6 months studying a fungus that screamed when exposed to sunlight. After that, very little surprises me. Ashira studied him for a moment. Did the fungus truly scream? Chen nodded. It was a very upsetting fungus. Ashira walked toward the table and gestured for him to sit. Chen lowered himself into the chair opposite her, glancing briefly at the strange alien devices embedded along the table's edge. What happens now? He asked. Ashira activated one of the devices. A three-dimensional star map appeared between them, dozens of glowing systems suspended in the air like drifting embers. We investigate the origin of the genetic connection. Chen leaned forward. Secretly, I assume. Yes. Good, Chen said. Because if the Empire finds out the Queen might be related to a human biologist, the political situation could become messy. Ashira tilted her head. You understand our political structure quickly. Chen nodded. Every advanced civilization eventually develops complicated politics. Humans just add shouting. Ashira touched one of the glowing stars in the map. The hologram zoomed toward a distant region of the galaxy. Several thousand years ago, Ashirian exploration fleets traveled far beyond this region. Chen studied the map. Exploration fleets meaning science missions or colonization? Both. Ah, Chen said quietly. The two most dangerous hobbies in the universe. Ashira expanded another cluster of ancient roots. These expeditions were conducted during a period known as the First Expansion Era. Chen squinted at the data. And you believe Earth might have been involved? Ashira looked directly at him. I believe the evidence suggests it. Chen leaned back in his chair and stared at the map. Well, he muttered, that's not something you hear every day. He rubbed his temples. Let me make sure I understand the situation. Either humans are extremely distant relatives of your species, or we are the result of some forgotten alien science project. Ashira remained silent. Chen raised one finger. In both scenarios, my university research grant is going to look wildly inadequate. For a moment, Ashira's serious expression softened again. You rely heavily on humor. It helps prevent panic. Chen leaned closer to the star map again. If ancient Ashirian explorers interacted with early humanity, there should be some kind of record. Ashira nodded. There are. Chen blinked. Wait, really? Fragments. Ashira moved her hand across the map again. Several ancient data markers appeared. Records that were sealed long ago. Chen frowned. Sealed by who? The Royal Archives. Chen sat up straighter. The Royal Archives that belong to you? Yes. And you're just finding out about them now? Ashira paused. Not all knowledge survives intact through centuries of political change. Chen considered that. Humans call that historical editing. Ashira glanced at him. You speak with unusual boldness for someone addressing a queen. Chen spread his hands. To be fair, you're also possibly my distant cousin. Ashira stared at him. Chen quickly added, scientifically speaking, of course. The star map flickered as new coordinates appeared. Several ancient Ashirian outposts began glowing along an old exploration path stretching across the galaxy. Chen leaned forward again, fascinated. If these archives contain the full record of the First Expansion Era, we might finally understand why our DNA matches. Ashira nodded slowly. And what humanity truly is. Chen looked back at the glowing map. Hundreds of stars shimmered quietly in the dark holographic space between them. He exhaled slowly. You know, he said, when I accepted this assignment, I expected maybe a few interesting microbes. Ashira looked at him. And now? Chen gestured at the galaxy. Now it looks like my family history might involve half the universe. The Royal Archive Chamber was buried deep beneath the palace. Chen followed Queen Ashira through a long, descending corridor that curved gently through the crystalline structure of the palace foundations. The walls here were darker than the bright halls above, the living crystals shifting into deep shades of blue and violet. Thin streams of soft light moved slowly through the walls like distant rivers. Chen glanced around as they walked. I have to say, he murmured, this is the most dramatic library entrance I've ever seen. Ashira walked beside him, her steps quiet and steady. You have many libraries on Earth? Oh yes, Chen said, but most of them don't look like they were built by an ancient alien civilization guarding forbidden cosmic secrets. He paused, looking down the long corridor. Usually they just smell like old paper. The corridor opened into a massive circular chamber. Chen stopped immediately. The archive room was enormous. Towering crystal pillars rose from the floor like frozen trees, each one filled with slowly moving streams of light. Suspended between the pillars were thousands of floating memory shards, small geometric crystals glowing softly in the air. Chen's eyes widened. Oh, wow. He slowly turned in place, staring upward. Okay, this is definitely cooler than my university library. Ashira stepped forward toward a circular console in the center of the room. These memory shards contain records from the earliest eras of the Ashirian Empire. Chen walked carefully between the floating crystals, trying not to touch anything. And nobody thought to mention this archive when the DNA results appeared? Ashira placed her hand on the console. The archive is rarely accessed. Why? Ashira hesitated slightly. Because many of the records here were sealed. Chen stopped walking. Sealed by who? Previous rulers. Chen folded his arms. That's never a good sign. The console beneath Ashira's hand glowed softly. Several nearby crystals slowly drifted closer, aligning themselves in a loose circle around the platform. Chen leaned closer to one of them. Inside the crystal, faint holographic shapes flickered, images of starships, alien landscapes, and unfamiliar constellations. These are historical recordings? He asked. Yes. Chen studied the ancient images with fascination. One of the holograms showed a fleet of sleek starships traveling through a glowing nebula. Their shapes were elegant and curved, very similar to modern Ashirian vessels. Exploration fleets, Chen said quietly. Ashira nodded. From the first expansion era, Chen rubbed his chin. That was thousands of years ago. Yes. Another crystal brightened. This one displayed a rotating map of the galaxy with several glowing routes spreading outward from the Ashirian home system. Chen squinted at the hologram. These exploration paths reach extremely far. Ashirian explorers traveled widely. Chen tilted his head. I'm noticing something interesting. What? He pointed at one of the glowing routes. That line passes extremely close to the Sol system. Ashira followed his gaze. Yes. Chen exhaled slowly. Well, he said, that's concerningly specific. Ashira tapped the console again. One of the crystals descended slowly toward them, glowing brighter as it approached. This shard contains records from the expedition that traveled along that route. Chen's curiosity sharpened instantly. Do we know what they were studying? Ashira activated the shard. The crystal unfolded into a holographic recording. An ancient Ashirian laboratory appeared in the air above the console. Several scientists moved around a table filled with biological samples. Chen leaned closer. Oh, that definitely looks like genetics research. One of the scientists in the recording lifted a glowing container filled with cellular material. A voice from the recording spoke in the Ashirian language, but the archive system translated it automatically. Subject genome adapting successfully. Hybrid compatibility increasing? Chen froze. Hybrid. Ashira watched the recording silently. The ancient scientist continued speaking. The project objective remains unchanged. A stable genetic bridge between Ashirian and local species. Chen slowly looked at Ashira. Local species. The holographic recording shifted. A new image appeared. An early planetary survey of a blue world covered in oceans and continents. Chen recognized it instantly. Earth. Ashira's long ears moved slightly. Yes. Chen stared at the recording. So thousands of years ago, Ashirian scientists were running genetic experiments on early humans. The recording flickered again. A new line of translated dialogue appeared. Hybrid line successfully implanted within native population. Future compatibility with Ashirian royal genome, highly probable. Chen leaned back slowly. Oh no, Ashira looked at him. You understand what this means? Chen nodded slowly. It means humanity wasn't just observed by alien explorers. He pointed at the hologram. We were engineered. He gestured toward himself. And apparently I'm the extremely confusing result of that experiment. Ashira studied the ancient recording again, her expression thoughtful. Chen sighed and rubbed his face. You know, he muttered, when my parents told me I was special, I didn't think they meant ancient alien hybrid. The holographic recording dimmed slightly as the crystal finished its playback. Chen looked around the enormous archive chamber again. Thousands of glowing memory shards floated quietly in the air. Somewhere in this vast room was the rest of the story. He folded his arms and looked back at Ashira. Well, one, he said. The good news is we solved the mystery of the DNA match. Ashira tilted her head. And the bad news? Chen pointed upward at the floating archive crystals. I have a feeling the rest of these records are about to make things a lot more complicated. Chen stood very still for a moment after the recording faded. The enormous archive chamber hummed quietly around them. Thousands of crystal memory shards floated between the towering pillars, glowing softly like a silent constellation. Each one contained fragments of history, decisions, discoveries, mistakes made by a civilization that had once spread across the stars. Chen slowly exhaled. Well, he said, that escalated faster than most of my research projects. Ashira remained beside the central console, her eyes still focused on the space where the hologram had been. Humanity carries Ashirian genetic design. Chen rubbed his chin. Which explains the 98% match. He paused. But it also raises about 12,000 new questions. Ashira looked toward him. Such as? Chen began counting on his fingers. First question, why would your ancestors create a hybrid line on Earth? Second question, why hide it? Third question, why does that hybrid line apparently connect directly to the royal genome? Ashira did not answer immediately. Chen raised another finger. And fourth question, which I feel personally invested in, why am I apparently the walking example of this entire experiment? Ashira turned back to the floating crystals. There must be more records. Chen nodded. Yes, ideally records that explain why ancient alien scientists decided to turn my family tree into a cosmic puzzle. Ashira touched the console again. Several additional memory shards drifted downward from the pillars. They aligned themselves slowly above the platform, glowing brighter as the archive system activated them. Chen leaned forward. All right, he said. Let's see what our mysterious ancestors were thinking. The first crystal expanded into another holographic recording. This one showed a large research station orbiting a distant blue planet. Through the station windows, Chen could clearly see Earth far below, its oceans and continents slightly different from the modern map. Ancient Earth. Chen leaned closer. That's definitely our planet, he murmured. The recording displayed a group of Ashirian scientists gathered around a projection table. Genetic diagrams floated in the air between them. The translated dialogue began. Hybrid program progressing as predicted. Human neural adaptability exceeds initial models. Chen nodded slowly. That sounds like us. Another scientist in the recording spoke. The royal genome compatibility remains the most stable configuration. Chen blinked. Royal genome again. Ashira watched silently. The holographic scientist continued. If future Ashirian rulers share this compatibility, the hybrid population may serve its intended purpose. Chen folded his arms. Intended purpose, he repeated. That phrase is doing a lot of work. The recording shifted again, revealing another part of the discussion. A younger scientist spoke with visible concern. The council questions the ethics of altering an emerging species. Another responded calmly. The objective is not domination. The objective is connection. Chen raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting definition of connection. Ashira tilted her head slightly. The hologram displayed a rotating diagram showing Ashirian DNA merging with early human genetic sequences. The translation continued. A future point of contact will occur when both civilizations reach technological maturity. The hybrid line will allow biological compatibility between leaders of both species. Chen slowly turned toward Ashira. Oh. Ashira met his gaze. Yes. Chen pointed at the hologram. They designed this so that someday a human and an Ashirian ruler could... What exactly? The translation answered before Ashira could. Establish a stable alliance between civilizations. Chen blinked again. Well, he scratched his head. That's ambitious. Ashira studied the recording with quiet focus. Chen paced slowly around the console. So let me summarize the situation. He gestured toward the hologram. Thousands of years ago, your scientists modified human DNA to create a genetic bridge between our species. Ashira nodded. Yes. And apparently that bridge leads directly to the Ashirian royal line. Yes. Chen stopped pacing. And somehow I ended up carrying the right genetic pattern. Ashira did not argue. Chen stared at the glowing DNA diagram again. You know, he said thoughtfully, when people talk about destiny, they usually mean something poetic. He pointed at the hologram. This is more like extremely complicated biology. Ashira's lips curved slightly. Chen sighed and leaned against the console. Well, the good news is the ancient scientists had peaceful intentions. And the bad news? Ashira asked. Chen gestured upward toward the floating archive crystals. If the rest of your empire learns about this project, half of them will probably want to use it for power, and the other half will want to erase it completely. Ashira's expression grew more serious. Yes. Chen folded his arms again. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos is us. Ashira looked at him quietly. Chen shrugged. I just wanted to study alien microbes. For a moment, Ashira actually laughed. The sound echoed softly through the vast archive chamber. Chen smiled slightly. Well, he said, looking up at the glowing crystals drifting through the air. At least now we know one thing. Ashira raised an eyebrow. What is that? Chen gestured toward the hologram of ancient Earth. Apparently the universe has been planning this meeting for several thousand years. He paused, then added, and I didn't even get to finish my vacation. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The archive chamber had grown quiet again after the final recording faded. The floating crystals drifted slowly between the pillars like patient stars, carrying the weight of thousands of years of forgotten decisions. Somewhere in those ancient memories, a group of scientists had quietly changed the future of two civilizations. Chen leaned against the console and stared up at the glowing shards. You know, he said eventually, when I chose xenobiology as a career, I imagined discovering strange microbes or maybe a clever alien insect. Ashira stood beside the console, her posture calm but thoughtful. And instead, Chen gestured toward the holographic remains of the ancient recording. Instead, I discovered my entire species might be part of a long-term diplomatic experiment. Ashira considered that. Your reaction is remarkably stable. Chen shrugged. That's because my brain hasn't fully caught up yet. He walked slowly around the console again, glancing at the ancient star map still hovering above the table. The exploration routes from the first expansion era stretched across the galaxy like faint threads connecting distant suns. One of those threads passed through the Sol system, glowing quietly in the darkness. Chen tapped the map lightly. So this was the plan, he said. Ashirian scientists plant a genetic bridge in early humanity. Thousands of years later, someone from that line eventually meets an Ashirian ruler. Ashira's long ears shifted slightly. Yes. Chen pointed between the two of them. And apparently we are the extremely confused result of that plan. Ashira allowed herself a small smile. Chen sighed and rubbed his face. Do you realize how strange this is from a human perspective? Ashira tilted her head. Explain. Imagine discovering that your distant ancestors were secretly modified by alien scientists so one day you could attend an awkward diplomatic meeting. Ashira folded her hands. That does sound unusual. Chen laughed quietly. That might be the greatest understatement in the galaxy. He leaned on the console again, studying the genetic diagrams floating faintly in the air. But the intention behind it, he continued. He pointed to one line of translated dialogue still lingering in the archive system. The objective is connection. Ashira looked at the same line. Yes. Chen nodded slowly. For ancient scientists, that's actually a pretty noble idea. Ashira stepped closer to the holographic map. The experiment succeeded. Chen raised an eyebrow. Did it? Ashira looked directly at him. Two civilizations that once knew nothing about each other now share a biological connection. That connection has brought you here. Chen thought about that. He looked out toward the far end of the archive chamber, where a large transparent opening revealed the glowing ocean far below the palace. Alien creatures drifted slowly beneath the water like enormous living lanterns. Back on Earth, Chen said quietly, People spend a lot of time arguing about where humanity came from. Ashira listened. Some say we are unique. Others say we are accidental. Chen glanced back toward the archive crystals. Turns out we were part of a very long science project. Ashira tilted her head slightly. Does that disturb you? Chen considered the question. Then he smiled faintly. No. Ashira looked surprised. Chen gestured toward the star map. If anything, it makes the universe feel a little more connected. He paused before adding, also, it explains why humans have such strange instincts to explore everything. Ashira allowed herself another quiet laugh. Chen stretched slightly and walked toward the open viewing platform overlooking the ocean. Ashira followed. They stood side by side for a moment, watching the alien sea glow beneath the floating palace. After everything they had discovered, the galaxy felt both larger and strangely more familiar. Chen folded his arms. So what happens now? Ashira looked out at the horizon where the violet ocean met the distant sky. The truth will eventually be revealed. Chen nodded. That will cause a lot of political arguments. Yes, and possibly a few angry speeches. Also yes. Chen smiled slightly. Well, humans are very experienced with those. Ashira turned toward him. But the discovery also creates an opportunity. Chen raised an eyebrow. For peace? For understanding? Chen looked back at the stars slowly appearing above the ocean as the planet's evening approached. Thousands of distant lights shimmered in the sky, some of them home to civilizations that humanity had not yet even discovered. He exhaled quietly. You know, he said, this assignment turned out to be a lot bigger than I expected. Ashira looked at him. And how has it changed you? Chen thought about that question carefully. He looked again at the ancient star map, the genetic diagrams and the endless archive crystals carrying the weight of forgotten centuries. Then he smiled. Well, he said, I used to think the universe was full of strangers. Ashira waited. Chen gestured toward the stars. Now it feels more like a very complicated family reunion. Ashira laughed softly again. The sound drifted into the quiet evening air above the glowing alien ocean. For thousands of years, the secret of the genetic bridge had waited in silence. Now it had finally done what it was designed to do. Two species that had once been separated by the vastness of space were no longer strangers. And somewhere beyond the horizon of the Ashirian world, the rest of the galaxy waited to see what they would build together.